What if I told you that a single rivalry between two ancient superpowers changed the destiny of the entire Mediterranean world? The Punic Wars were not just battles between Rome and Carthage. They were a clash of ambition, betrayal, and unimaginable strategies that shaped history forever. In an era when old beliefs were crumbling and curiosity was unstoppable, a single idea could ignite revolutions in science, philosophy, and society. The Enlightenment was a time when daring thinkers challenged centuries of tradition, giving birth to groundbreaking theories that still shape the modern world today. The sun rose over the golden sands of Egypt, casting a warm glow on the mighty Nile River. Its waters shimmered like liquid glass, winding gracefully through the land and giving life to a kingdom that seemed eternal. Along its banks, farmers worked the soil, priests prepared offerings, and traders carried goods to the great cities. Above all of this daily rhythm stood one figure whose very name demanded awe and obedience, the Pharaoh. In the eyes of the Egyptians, Pharaoh was not just a ruler. He was the living embodiment of divine power, the earthly son of Ra, the sun god. His words were law, his presence was sacred, and his throne was the center of the world. Around him, colossal statues and towering temples reminded every citizen that their king was no ordinary man, but a bridge between gods and mortals. The pyramids, rising like eternal mountains from the desert, whispered of this belief. To the people, these stone giants were not merely tombs, but gateways to eternity, symbols of the pharaoh's unshakable bond with the heavens. And so long as Pharaoh lived, Egypt felt secure, powerful, and untouchable. Yet, beneath the surface of this grandeur, a quiet tension began to stir. In the bustling city squares and the hidden corners of the kingdom, a community whispered about a god unlike any other. This god was unseen, beyond temples and statues, yet his presence was said to be more powerful than the sun, the river, or the pyramids themselves. Among those who believed in this unseen god were a people who had long lived under Pharaoh's authority. To the Egyptians, they were laborers, foreigners, and outsiders. But, to themselves, they were heirs of a promise, waiting for the day when their God would reveal his power. And soon that day would come. Far from the glittering palaces of Thebes, a man who once belonged to Pharaoh's household walked in the desert, carrying within him a message that would challenge the very foundation of Egyptian belief. He was not a king, nor a warrior, nor a priest of the Egyptian gods, yet his voice would one day stand against the most powerful throne on earth. For the first time in Egypt's long and glorious history, the pharaoh would face a rival, not with armies, not with weapons, but with a claim that struck at the very heart of his identity, that there was a God greater than Pharaoh himself. This was the beginning of a story that would shake a kingdom, unsettle its people, and echo through time, etched not only in scripture but also in the silent stones of Egypt's monuments. And so it begins. The tale of when Pharaoh, king of the Nile, dared to challenge the God of eternity. Long before the conflict began, Egypt stood as one of the most dazzling civilizations the world had ever known. Its very heartbeat was the Nile River, a lifeline that turned the desert into a land of abundance. Each year, the river flooded its banks, leaving behind rich soil that produced endless harvests. To the Egyptians, this was no ordinary river. It was a god, a living force that flowed with both mystery and blessing. At the center of this flourishing kingdom stood Pharaoh, the supreme ruler. His authority stretched across the valleys, the temples, and even the heavens themselves. To the people, Pharaoh was not simply a king, but a divine figure, chosen by the gods to guide the world. In temples, priests proclaimed him the son of Ra, the sun god, and protector of Ma'at, the divine order of truth and justice. The grandeur of Egypt was reflected in its architecture. Towering obelisks reached for the sky, temples glowed with golden inscriptions, and the pyramids, immense structures of stone, stood like eternal guardians of the desert. These monuments told a story. Egypt was a land destined to last forever, just as the sun rose without fail each morning. But while the Egyptians lived in awe of their king, not everyone shared in this glory. Within the borders of the empire lived communities of foreigners who labored under Egyptian authority. They built cities, carried stones, and toiled in the fields. Yet their lives were marked not by wealth or honor, but by hardship. Among them were the descendants of Jacob, a people who held fast to the belief in a single, invisible God. For generations, these people endured their fate in silence. They had no throne, no army, no monuments of stone. Yet in their traditions they carried the memory of promises given to their ancestors, promises of freedom and a land of their own. Still, to the Egyptians, such ideas seemed absurd. What god could rival Pharaoh, the son of Ra, whose power was carved into every stone of the land? To challenge Pharaoh's authority was to challenge the very order of the universe. And yet, history has shown that even the mightiest kingdoms can be shaken, not by armies at their gates, but by ideas that rise from within. Egypt stood proud, unshakable, and eternal. But behind its golden temples and towering pyramids, the stage was being set for a conflict unlike any the world had ever seen. A clash not of swords, but of belief. A confrontation between the god-king of Egypt and the unseen god of a small oppressed people. The sands of time waited, silent and patient, for the day when Egypt's glory would be tested. The life of Egypt moved with precision, like the turning of the seasons. Each morning, the temples filled with incense, priests chanted prayers to Ra, and the people bowed their heads before Pharaoh's statues. To them, all was stable, eternal, and under the control of their god-king. But in the quiet corners of the land, whispers began to spread. Whispers about a man who once lived among Pharaoh's household, but now spoke with a strange authority. His name was Moses. Moses had once known the grandeur of Pharaoh's palace, its polished marble floors, its golden halls, and the weight of power that surrounded the throne. Yet he had also walked among his people, the laborers who bent their backs under Egypt's command. He knew their stories, their struggles, and most of all, their faith in an unseen God who promised deliverance. One day, Moses returned from the wilderness with a message. It was not a plea, nor a rebellion, but a declaration. "Let my people go, that they may serve their God." When these words reached Pharaoh's court, they caused both confusion and outrage. How could anyone speak to Pharaoh, son of Ra, with such boldness? Who was this God that dared to command Egypt's king? Pharaoh's advisers dismissed Moses as a dreamer, a man stirred by desert visions. Yet the conviction in his voice could not be ignored. He did not beg. He did not tremble. He spoke as though he carried the authority of a power greater than the pyramids themselves. The request was more than political. It was spiritual. If Pharaoh agreed, he would be admitting that another god had power greater than his own. To a king worshipped as divine, such an idea was unthinkable. And so, Pharaoh answered with defiance. His words echoed through the palace. "Who is this God that I should obey him? Egypt bows to me, not to voices of the desert." But from that moment, Egypt was no longer the same. What began as a single voice in Pharaoh's hall soon grew into a storm that spread across the land. Calamities would come, doubts would rise, and the strength of Egypt's throne would be tested in ways no one could have imagined. For the first time, the king of Egypt had been challenged, not by armies, but by a god he could not see. The conflict had begun. Pharaoh sat upon his throne, carved from stone and decorated with gold. Around him, pillars rose high, their walls covered in hieroglyphs that told the story of Egypt's eternal strength. He looked out over his court, advisers, priests, and guards all waiting for his word. To them, he was not simply a man, but a living God whose will shaped the fate of nations. Yet, in the stillness of his chamber, Pharaoh wrestled with a thought that disturbed his heart. The man, Moses, had spoken with a confidence Pharaoh had rarely seen, even among his own priests. He did not bow. He did not flatter. He simply declared that Egypt must release a people who had served the kingdom for generations. Pharaoh could not allow this. To yield would mean weakness. To surrender would mean admitting that another power, invisible and foreign, was greater than Ra, greater than Egypt, greater than Pharaoh himself. His pride was not only personal, it was the very foundation of his throne. Egypt's people believed that Pharaoh upheld Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth and justice. If he bent his knee to this god of the desert, what would happen to the order of the world? Would not Egypt descend into chaos? And so, Pharaoh's decision was sealed. He hardened his heart against Moses' words. To his court he declared, "Egypt is strong. The gods of our fathers protect us. This man's voice is nothing against the pillars of eternity." But, deep within, pride mixed with fear. What if the people began to doubt him? What if their faith in Pharaoh faltered? Already, whispers spread like sand carried by the wind. Already the question had been asked, who is greater, Pharaoh or this unseen God? Pharaoh could not let such doubt grow. His answer would be defiance. His reign, his temples, his pyramids, all stood as proof that Egypt's king bowed to no one. And so the stage was set. Pharaoh would resist, no matter the cost. His pride became a wall, and behind that wall he prepared to meet the challenge that was coming. But as history would show, the higher a king builds his pride, the harder it falls when tested by eternity. At first, Pharaoh's refusal seemed firm and unshakable. His court applauded his strength, and the priests assured the people that Egypt's gods would protect their land. Life along the Nile continued as usual, or so it seemed. But soon the familiar rhythms of Egypt began to falter. The river, once clear and life-giving, turned strange in its color and smell. Fish floated lifeless upon its surface, and the farmers who drew water for their fields found it unfit to use. The Nile, the very heartbeat of Egypt, no longer flowed as it once had. In the villages, whispers spread. "Has the God of Moses touched our river?" some asked in fear. Others dismissed it as chance, yet unease grew in every heart. Then came other disturbances. Unusual swarms filled the skies, ruining harvests before they could be gathered. Livestock grew weak, and illness crept through the fields. Even the weather seemed unsettled, as though the land itself trembled under an invisible hand. Each event left the people shaken, their eyes turning not to the temples but to Pharaoh, waiting for reassurance. And Pharaoh, proud upon his throne, declared with confidence, "Egypt is eternal. These are but passing troubles. Trust in your king." Yet behind the polished words his court grew restless. Some advisers urged him to yield to Moses' request, fearing that the calamities would worsen. But Pharaoh's heart would not bend. To give in would mean surrender, and surrender would mean the collapse of his divine image. Still, the people began to doubt. For generations they had believed that Pharaoh's power upheld Ma'at, the sacred order of life. But what order was this when the river soured, the skies filled with pests, and the fields failed to give their fruit? The grandeur of Egypt remained. Its temples still glittered in the sun, its pyramids still rose against the desert sky. But cracks had appeared in the faith of its people. And though Pharaoh tightened his grip, the land itself seemed to whisper, change was coming. The palace of Pharaoh had always been a place of confidence, filled with music, ceremony, and the assurance of eternal order. But now, a heavy silence lingered in its halls. The calamities that had shaken Egypt left scars not easily hidden. The people no longer looked at Pharaoh with the same unquestioning devotion. Whispers haunted the marketplaces, echoing the question Pharaoh hated most. Is our king truly a god? And then came the warning. Moses stood once more in Pharaoh's court, his voice steady, his message unchanged. Let the people of God go. But this time, his words carried an urgency that could not be ignored. He spoke of a night unlike any other, a night when Egypt's might would be humbled, and the world would know that the unseen God was greater than any throne on earth. Pharaoh's advisers begged him to listen. Even the priests, who had once filled the palace with songs of Ra's glory, now shifted uneasily in their places. Yet Pharaoh's pride was like a fortress. He had ruled too long, commanded too much, and been worshipped by too many to let go of his claim. He rose from his throne, his voice thundering across the chamber. Never. Egypt bows to no one. If your God is mighty, let him prove it. Pharaoh will not yield. And so the night came. Across Egypt the air grew heavy, as though the very heavens held their breath. Families gathered in fear, uncertain of what would unfold. The people of Moses prepared quietly, trusting in the promise of their unseen God. Then the silence was broken. A cry rose in the darkness, first from one house, then from another, until the whole land echoed with sorrow. Egypt, the proud and eternal, had been struck in a way no army could deliver. The power of Pharaoh had met its match. The son of Ra had been challenged and found wanting. In the heart of his palace, Pharaoh was shaken. The man who once declared himself divine now stood face to face with the truth. His throne was not unshakable, his power was not eternal, and the unseen God of Moses had shown a strength beyond the pyramids, beyond the Nile, beyond the reach of kings. For the first time, Pharaoh's pride began to crack. The palace that once glittered with pride was now cloaked in grief. Pharaoh, who had stood unyielding through every challenge, sat in silence. His voice, once filled with thunder, now trembled with weariness. The cries of Egypt still echoed through the land, and even the proudest priests no longer dared to proclaim him divine. At last, Pharaoh called for Moses. His face was pale, his strength broken. The words he had sworn never to speak now escaped his lips. Go, take your people, leave Egypt, and serve your God as you have asked. And with those words, history shifted. The people who had long labored in Egypt's fields, who had bent beneath the weight of endless burdens, now rose to gather their belongings. With haste they prepared, for they knew this was their moment of deliverance. Families came together, children clung to their parents, and elders lifted their eyes to the horizon with hope. As dawn approached, they set out on a journey unlike any other. Step by step, they left behind the land of pyramids and palaces, carrying not treasures of gold, but the promise of freedom. The streets of Egypt, once filled with the proud processions of Pharaoh's rule, now witnessed a different kind of march, a march of faith, of a people who believed in an unseen God who had shown his power. Yet Pharaoh, even in his grief, wrestled with himself. His pride still whispered that he was king, that Egypt was eternal, that no ruler could suffer such humiliation. Though he had spoken the words of surrender, in his heart the struggle was not finished. But for now, the people were free. The unseen God had broken the chains of the mightiest empire of the age. Egypt, though still crowned with pyramids and temples, could not escape the truth. Pharaoh's power had been challenged, and he had been forced to yield. The sands of Egypt are timeless. They have seen kings rise and fall, temples built and forgotten, and empires flourish only to fade into memory. Among these shifting sands stand the pyramids, silent, unmoving, eternal. They remain as monuments to human pride and ambition, yet also as witnesses to the fragile nature of power. Pharaoh once believed his throne unshakable, his word eternal, his name destined to live forever. And yet, his story is remembered not for his victories, but for his defiance, the day he stood against a God he could not see, and was humbled. For the people who left Egypt, this story became a foundation of faith, that the unseen God was not bound by temples of stone, nor by the crowns of kings. He was greater than the Nile, greater than the pyramids, greater even than the mightiest ruler on earth. Generations later, travelers would gaze at Egypt's monuments with awe. They would marvel at the grandeur of the temples, the brilliance of the hieroglyphs, the sheer scale of the pyramids. But hidden within those stones lies another story, a reminder that power without humility leads to downfall and that no throne, no matter how glorious, lasts forever. The lesson of Pharaoh is not only for kings, it is for all who rise too high in their own pride, forgetting that true greatness lies not in being worshipped, but in serving. The unseen God does not measure glory in monuments or crowns, but in justice, humility, and faithfulness. And so, the story endures. The pyramids still stand, bathed in the golden light of the Egyptian sun, silent guardians of a tale that is echoed through millennia. A tale of a king who challenged God, and a God who proved that eternity belongs not to men, but to Him alone.